Good evening. Welcome to the Gala readings for the Montana Festival of the Book. My name is Mark Schraus. I'm director of the Montana Committee for the Humanities and the Festival of the Book. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this, our final event for this year's festival. You can't. I need a little technical help. Can you hear me now? Oh, good. Okay. All right, I will begin again. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this final event for the 2003 Montana Festival of the Book. My name is Mark Schraus with the Montana Committee for the Humanities. We're the sponsor of the festival, and it's a great joy to welcome you to this gala reading. There are a number of things I have to say to get us started, so I'm just going to proceed right into them. And first of all, our thank yous for all the people who help us do this. Starting with our major sponsors, which are the two endowments, the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts, from both of whom we receive very generous support. The Montana Arts Council has been a partner in this event since the beginning, and they continue to be, and we very much appreciate their support. This is literary arts and humanities, and we're delighted to partner with the Arts Council in doing this. We've also received major support from the Charles Engelhardt Foundation, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Foundation, and in particular the Missoulian, which has just done a wonderful job in helping us get the word out this year about the festival. We're very appreciative to Mike McAnally and all the folks at the Missoulian for that. In addition to major sponsors, there are also a number of partners, other sponsors, and so forth that are listed on the back of the program. If I thanked all the people I have to thank, we'd be here all night and you'd never get to hear David Quammen or any of the other speakers. So I would ask you just simply to look at the back of the program and when you have a chance, thank those people in some way or other. Thanks also to the many people who supported our silent auction, donating gifts, all kinds of good stuff there, and the people who also bought things. We really appreciate it. And not least, thanks to the volunteers who've helped us all these past 2 days. We're a three-person staff. We have 3 people who help us during the festival, but beyond that, it's all volunteers. And those people certainly warrant our thanks. In particular, I wanted to mention the 3 who've worked on our staff with us, those being Judy Klein, Susan Carlson, and Lulu Yee. But thanks to all the volunteers, and especially volunteers from my own board, the Montana Committee for the Humanities. Thank you. Last night, many of you saw a movie here, Stone Reader. And I think for many of us, it was not just a movie, it was an event. And I hope that you would encourage your friends to come back and see this event. It'll be playing in the Wilma this week, I understand, and I think it's something I'm probably going to come back and do again myself. It's a wonderful event, wonderful movie, and our thanks to Mark Moskowitz for being with us last night and all day today, talking about books and films and writing and lots of other things. It's been a very great thing. I have the honor of announcing the winner of this year's Happy Tales Literary Contest. The contest asked writers to supply happy endings to works in need of them. And in past years, we have worked diligently to improve on the writings of William Shakespeare, Ernest Hemingway, and Norman MacLean. The winner receives both a stipend and the Nahum Tate Cup. This is the Nahum Tate Cup. Nahum Tate, as you all recall, was the 18th century poet laureate who rewrote King Lear and whose happy ending of the play was the version performed in the British Isles for the next 150 years. For 2004, the winner of the coveted, prestigious Nahum Tate Cup is John Clayton of Red Lodge for his happy ending to Montana, 1948. Mr. Clayton's victory brings with it two firsts. For the first time, a writer has won the contest twice. Mr. Clayton also won in 2001. And for the first time, an author whose work is the subject of the parody is present at the festival, namely Larry Watson. The good news, Larry, is that you are now legitimately in the ranks of Shakespeare, Hemingway, and Norman Maclean. Congratulations to you both. John will be buying Larry a drink after tonight's readings. In the past year, Montana has lost three great writers, and we would be remiss in not observing their passing and honoring them. Stephen Ambrose, who loved this state and called it his home in his last years. No one has done more to bring American history to the American people. Thomas Savage, who wrote of this place so eloquently in novels such as The Power of the Dog and The Sheep Queen. We honored Thomas Savage at last year's Montana Festival of the Book, and I know that that recognition at the time was very meaningful to him. And finally, James Welch, who was a mainstay of our first three festivals, who was among our first Gala readers, and through his writing and personal warmth meant so much to readers and fellow writers. In next year's festival, we will devote special attention to Jim's work and to contemporary Native American writing more generally. Now it's my pleasure to introduce this evening's first author, David Quammen. Educated at Yale and Oxford University, David Quammen is a renowned science and nature writer. He is a two-time National Magazine Award winner for his science essays and columns in Outside Magazine. He's also received an Academy Award in Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the Lannan Literary Award for Nonfiction. His award-winning nonfiction book, Song of the Dodo, Island Biogeography in an Age of Extinctions, is a readable and scholarly treatment of the history of evolutionary theory, biodiversity, population dynamics, and extinctions. Mr. Quammen's collections of essays include Natural Acts, A Sidelong View of Science and Nature, The Flight of the Iguana, Boilerplate Rhino, Wild Thoughts from Wild Places. His fiction includes Bloodline, The Soul of Victor Tronco, The Zolta Configuration, and To Walk the Line. His new book, which received front page notice in the New York Times, is Monster of God, which is a book on large predators, their ecological and mythic significance to humans, and the question of whether any wild populations of lions, crocodiles, tigers, and bears will exist on this planet in the next 100 years. David Quammen's other awards and fellowships include a Rhodes Scholarship, Guggenheim Fellowship, the BP Natural World Book Prize, John Burroughs Medal for Nature Writing, the New York Public Library Helen Bernstein Award, the Penn Spielvogel Diamondstein Award for Art of the Essay, and an honorary doctorate from Montana State University. Born in Cincinnati, David was drawn to Montana 28 years ago, it is said by the trout, and he currently resides in Bozeman. David Quammen.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this about right? Is that better? Thank you all for being here. I can't see any of you right now. And I'd add my thanks to all the people that Mark thanked and the Montana Committee for the Humanities, but I'd also want to thank Mark Schraus himself and Kim Anderson, who, with help from lots of other people, have put this together. Mark said, I came to Montana 28 years ago. Actually, last week was the 30th anniversary. I can remember it vividly. September 12th, 1973, I drove across Lolo Pass and down into Missoula in a Volkswagen bus filled with penguin paperbacks and fishing gear. Age 25 and with not too many.
It's not your reward.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to forget about that, Mark. Anyway, the 30th anniversary has just passed, and it's been one of the, not just one of the most lasting, but one of the most important and fortunate decisions, acts that I've done in my life, deciding to emigrate to Montana. I'm going to read a little bit something from this new book, Monster of God. As Mark mentioned, it's about big predators, what I call alpha predators, meaning those that are occasionally known as man-eaters, or that produce individuals that occasionally kill and eat a human. Those particular creatures that are big enough, fierce enough, solitary enough, such that a single individual can kill and eat a human. And there's just a short list of animals that fall in that category. Brown bear, lion, tiger, polar bear, jaguar, leopard, Nile crocodile, saltwater crocodile, Komodo dragon, and a few others. Those are what I call the alpha predators. And I'm interested, in the book, I discuss their importance, extreme importance to humans, to us, in shaping the way we perceive our role in the world. I argue that they have done an important service in keeping us humble by reminding us that we're just another flavor of meat. They've never let us forget that we're part of a food chain, not above it or separate from the world of nature. I focus on 4 cases in the book. I also, 4 particular populations in 4 parts of the world, and those are the saltwater crocodile in northern Australia, the Asiatic lion in western India, the Siberian tiger in the Russian Far East, and the brown bear in the mountains of Romania. I also discuss some ideas, and one of the ideas I go into is what I label the muskrat conundrum. The muskrat conundrum, that label derives from a study that an ecologist named Paul Arrington did back in the 40s and the 50s of mink and muskrat interactions in a wetland in Iowa. But from it, he derived some really important larger ideas about the nature of predator-prey relations, and he became one of the important theorists of the science of predation. He found, among other things, that although mink prey on muskrats, mink predation does not generally limit the size of a muskrat population. They're limited by internal factors, their own sense of crowdedness, their reproductive rate, and that when mink prey on muskrats, generally what they're taking are what Arrington called the wastage parts of the population, the muskrats that have no good habitat, essentially the homeless, disempowered, displaced muskrats. Those are the ones who suffer from mink predation. This was interesting to me because besides looking at predator populations around the world, I looked at their relationship with native peoples. And I was concerned with the fact that big predators are dangerous, scary, and expensive. And the people who suffer most from the downside of big predators are local people, native people, indigenous people, rural people, people without much in the way of material resources or political power or voice. They're the ones who pay the costs of big predators, and we, distant, nature-loving people on other sides of the planet, are the ones who generally enjoy the benefits. The muskrat conundrum, as I describe it in the book, is the situation wherein we need to find ways to redistribute the benefits as well as the costs. We need, if we're going to conserve these beasts, we need to find ways such that the poor local people aren't the ones paying the costs and getting little of the benefits, while we on the other side of the world enjoy the aesthetic, spiritual intellectual benefits of knowing the predators are there, but pay little of the costs. I'm going to read you a passage from the long section based in Romania. I went to Romania a number of times after I found out that there are 5,000 brown bear living in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. 5,000. And I said, that's amazing. 5,000 brown bear in a blighted, industrialized, Eastern Bloc, former Soviet country. So I started going there to find out how could there be 5,000 brown bear in Romania? The answer is complicated. It has partly to do with the history of the dictatorship of Nicolae Ceausescu, who fancied himself a great bear hunter, hunted more bears than any single man should, but wouldn't allow anyone else to kill bears for 25 years. Part of the answer is the fact that the Romanian Forest Department supplementally feeds bears. They did during Ceausescu's reign, raising bigger and bigger, more and more bears for him to kill, and they still do that. They still essentially farm bears now for foreign hunters to kill, and bear skins are an export product. People pay a lot of money to kill a Romanian bear and take the pelt home. Another part of the answer is the fact that there's great habitat in the Carpathian Mountains, and that habitat is also occupied by shepherds and sheep. I'm going to read you about 9 pages. Romania contains millions of sheep. By one rough estimate, 9 million head. Many of them spend the summer grazing the moist grass of high mountain meadows, surrounded by forest that harbors bears, and attended by shepherds and guard dogs. The guard dogs are toothy and belligerent. They're a mongrelized army, conforming to no purebred type, but the most typical is a large-bodied, big-shouldered canine with medium-length fur, a short snout, and a furry face, like an Airedale wearing the head of Lon Chaney's Wolfman. Trying to get a little bit of light adjustment here. There we go. Some of the dogs are fitted with spike collars as protection from neck bites in a fight against wolves. All are required to wear a sort of T-bar hobble dangling below the collar, a short piece of wood known as a juji, which jounces enough to prevent the dog from charging off on renegade pursuits of roe deer or other game. The juji also signals to hunters that the animal is a shepherd dog, not a feral pest to be killed. Puppies learn their sheep guarding habits by galloping along with adults. Nobody sends Romanian dogs to obedience school. The typical flock of 300 or 400 sheep is attended by at least a half dozen of these irascible curs. The shepherds, taciturn and self-possessed men who can be tough when they need to, carry no weaponry other than stout staffs. If you, as an interloper, stroll into a Romanian shepherd's camp, you'll want a stout staff yourself for defense against the dogs. Guns are unthinkable, or if thought of, considered unattainable or unnecessary. So the nature of interactions among Romanian bears, Romanian sheep, and the guardians of those sheep probably hasn't changed much in the last 1,000 years. That may account for why the problem seems chronic but not acute, and why its resolution is usually non-lethal, except for the sheep. Bears, humans, and dogs were well acquainted with one another in the Carpathians long before the first rifle came along. In many cases, the sheep of a flock belong to several different owners who contract with an organizator destina, a camp organizer, to have their animals pastured in the mountains for a summer season. The organizer acquires grazing rights for a certain area, maintains a base camp centered at a simple cabin, hires a chief shepherd, baci is the Romanian term, or fills that role himself, assembles a crew of other shepherds, supplies guard dogs, adds a few dozen dairy cows and maybe some horses or donkeys for pulling a cart, takes his costs and his profit, if any, in the form of cheese made from fresh milk. Usually it's bovine or combination of bovine and ovine milk, cheese made at the cabin, and returns the sheep to their owners in early autumn. The baci, the head man himself, often functions as the expert cheesemaker. The owners get a specified share of the cheese. The rest is left for the organizer to sell in local markets. If a ewe or a ram has been killed by a bear or a wolf, the organizer is absolved of responsibility on one condition. He must show evidence that the sheep wasn't simply allowed to stray off and disappear. Generally, that means producing one of the sheep's ears, inside which is an identifying tattoo, like a brand on a cow. If the organizer can't deliver that tattooed ear, he may have to pay for the lost sheep himself. No effective system of government compensation exists, and insurance is impracticable for small operators. So the organizer has strong incentive to battle for the life, or at least the ears, of every sheep. He passes that imperative along to the shepherds, who know their duties, value their jobs, and may themselves be held financially accountable for any animal lost to a bear through their negligence. One result? Shepherds get injured, not just while defending sheep against attack, but even more perilous, while trying to take a fresh carcass away from a bear. This is the situation, says Ovidio Ionescu, head of the Forest Research Institute, in which the great majority of conflicts occur. Parenthetically, he had documented 193 bear conflicts within a recent 7-year period. Of those, 18 were fatal. 18 people had died in bear-human conflicts in the Carpathians of Romania. A colleague of Ionescu's, a Swiss-Italian scientist named Annette Mertens, studied the economics of this system. Visiting about 20 different shepherd camps during each of 2 summers for a total sample encompassing 17,000 sheep, she found that annual losses to predators averaged 2%. Most of those were inflicted by Canis lupus, the wolf, which is more dangerous to sheep, though less so to humans, than Ursus arctos, the bear. Bears accounted for 36% of the losses. Considering the market value of an adult ewe plus the value of lost cheese, Mertens calculated an average loss at each camp from bear predation equivalent to $169. It's serious money to a camp organizer who earns only about $100 a month. After learning this much from Mertens and accompanying her on some visits, I decided to make an informal survey of my own. With a venturous young translator named Cyprian Chip Pavel, I set off on a series of hikes into the high country. We climbed steep wooded slopes above the mountain roads, above the trails, following hoof prints and sheep shit toward the alpine meadows where shepherds spend their summer. Sometimes we carry simple provisions, red deer sausages, peanuts, raisins, chocolate, as well as sleeping bags and a tent. Sometimes we carry gifts, fresh oranges, cigarettes, pint bottles of a Romanian plum brandy called palinka for the shepherds. Usually we carry walking sticks for defense against the dogs. We see some gorgeous landscape, mountain lakes, stony ridges and peaks, swales of verdant grass, fog-shrouded expanses of krumholtz and heather, all of it chilly and wet, even at the height of what down in the lowlands is a summer drought. We talk with dozens of nut-hard, gentle-spirited men. We're welcomed often with warm hospitality, candid comments, log seats beside a cook fire, hot mamaliga, which is Romanian polenta, grainy and yellow, served as a steaming paste, and freshly made cheese of the 3 traditional kinds: urda, sweet and crumbly; telemea, salty like feta, but easily sliced; and branza de burduf, sweet and smooth, packed for market in cylinders sewn from fir bark. Rarely we face the cold truculence of a camp boss who wants no visitors and no palaver. Among the many things I discover is that this research regimen, so rich in exercise, cold mountain air, and cheese, may be bad for my cholesterol count, but is highly agreeable to my disposition. I also learned something of how Romanian shepherds feel toward bears. In the Tarlung Valley, just east of Brajov, big city in the highlands, I meet a Baci named Ion, a great-bellied man in a lavender flannel shirt, his head big as a pumpkin, who tells me that he's been lucky this year. No bear trouble yet, though a wolf recently ran through camp. Last year, on the other hand, Eon lost 2 sheep to a very large bear on the ridge behind us. The bear jumped his flock in broad daylight, and even his dogs, which seemed more than adequately fierce to me, couldn't stop it. That bear had a maimed paw, maybe from a trap, Eon recalls. It devoured both sheep. Nothing left to recover. No ears. Total loss. As we chat, Eon sets out some fresh urda sliced in a tin bowl. The cheese is luscious and creamy, like a guilty dessert. I ask about earlier years. The translation process allows me time to keep eating. Well, in prior summers, Eon put his camp in the Bucej Mountains, a small, majestic range within the Carpathians, 30-some miles to the southwest. Many bears down there. He'd lose 10 sheep and 1 or 2 cows in a season. And so, I presume, he moved up here to escape them? Escape? Nah, he has no such delusion. Where is not bear? Eon says. Where can you go and not seeing bear? But he declines to complain that there are too many bears in the mountains. No, too many is not problem. Problem, he says, is that Forest Department doesn't feed them sufficiently. When the feeding troughs are empty, that's when bears come after his sheep. Pondering this peculiar edifice of assumptions and expectations, I gobble another chunk of urda. On the next ridge over, across several meadows and a small creek, Chip and I walk into another camp and are met again by angry dogs and an amiable bachi. This is Niku, a compact man in a brown sweater vest and a green felt hat. Bear trouble? No, not much. One urs did visit several nights ago, but Niku's dogs, he has 13 and they're good, he says. His dogs ran it off. His camp, simple but tidy, is centered around a pair of plank huts, one devoted mainly to cheese making, the other to cheese storage. The shepherds sleep outside, wrapped in sheepskin robes near the flock. Niku gives me a tour of his operation, including the barrel of brine in which float big chunks of telemea and, bobbing among them, a single raw egg. When the egg sinks, he explains, it's time to add more salt. And over here, these are the tanks in which the boiled milk, activated by the culture, undergoes its magical change. As the cheese begins to set, he presses out the water with a wooden rake, or else through cheesecloth, 1 gauge of cloth for telemea, a different gauge for kash, another type of cheese. In the second hut, under towels, rest many large rounds of kash, hefty and squat. Kash is the intermediate step toward branza de Bourdouf. They'll be held for a week and then put through a grinder to make the branza, which is then packed into pig bladders for long-term storage or else tamped into those fir bark tubes for market. Niku serves us a generous spread of samples, telemea and branza and urda, along with a pile of salt for putting edge to the urda's sweetness, plus a slab of cold mamaliga sliced like meatloaf. We're joined by another fellow and a handsome, weather-tanned woman who seem to be here on a Saturday visit from the valley. Seeing my gusto for Niku's product, the fellow jokes to me in Romanian, "Branza de Bourdouf, that stuff is good for a man." He raises his forearm, big and stiff as a stallion's penis, and knocks on the door. Makes you hard. The woman rolls her eyes and swats him. As good as Viagra? I ask in English. Global citizen, he recognizes the word. Viagra? No, branza. Forget your fancy American drugs. Romanian cheese will do fine. We express our thanks and hike on. Later in the afternoon, on another stretch of ridge, we encounter Niku and 3 of his shepherds still agitated after chasing off some gypsies who tried to steal a few horses. Watch out for those bastards as you hike down through the woods, one shepherd warns. They'll rob you too. Gypsies suffer from lingering prejudice in Romania, but today's episode, at least as Niku recounts it, helps fuel the bias. His parting wisdom to me, never mind bears and wolves. Gypsy predation is more troublesome to the shepherd. I'm going to jump ahead a couple of visits. Not many miles away, on another high slope above the Tarlung Valley, we rouse from his afternoon nap another elderly bachi, nearly deaf, with a smile brightened by brown eyes and gold incisors. Another Eon. His name is Eon Petrika. He's got 400 head of sheep up here, tended by 4 shepherds. "Where are you from?" he asks in a cordial shout. "Brajov," says Chip, and I say America, both of which seem inconceivably distant to the man. "Lost my hearing back when I worked for the Postal Service," he explains, hollering above the din of his deafness. "From driving a truck, a drafty one, through the cold winters. Sheep losses? Maybe 2 or 3 a year. That's to bears, and another 10 to wolves. Last year, there was a big red bear. It took a couple of sheep. 3 years ago, we had 6 bears up here," he recalls. "But the dogs did their job. 5 years ago, one shepherd got injured and went to the hospital because he tried to stop a bear." The moral, as our host briskly takes it, is, don't upset the bear. If your dogs can't stop him, let the beast have what he wants. Say, what's the current price of bread down below? Having retired from the Postal Service 7 years ago with a paltry pension and spent the subsequent summers up in the shepherds' camps, he evidently gets hungry for news. "Who's going to win the election? If they privatize all the factories, what'll be left for Romania?" This leads me to a question about Ceausescu, toward whom the deaf bachi harbors no post-communist nostalgia. "Ceausescu? He killed a lot of people," Chip translates at normal volume. "Somebody else kill him. When you're making good, you find good. When you're making bad, you find bad. Want some cheese?" He stirs up a fresh pot of mamaliga and then dumps it out. Whoomp, a soft mound of corn mush on a bare wooden table. Beside it, he sets a bowl of branza, from which we each take a few cheesy nuggets, pressing them inside a handful of warm mamaliga and then shaping the whole thing like a snowball around a rock. We put our golden spheres into the fire's embers for 10 minutes of slow roasting. This simple delicacy is known by Romanian shepherds as bulls. Toasted half crisp on the outside, raked from the coals, broken open, each ball is a corn sandwich filled with molten cheese. You haven't tasted the Carpathian ether, nor begun to understand what might draw men to those high, severe places until you've had bulls from a shepherd's fire, washed down with buttermilk and a nip of cheap palinka. Ion, John, is a common name in Romania. It seems to be commoner still among the aged shepherding class. In 2 weeks of walking the highlands, I encounter more Ions than I can keep straight. One man who's unforgettable among them is Ion Dinka, 67 years old and not a bachi, not a boss, not a cheesemaker, merely a shepherd, still climbing out of camp each day with his flock. I find him on a patch of meadow near the Transfăgăraș Highway, hundreds of yards above a switchback curve just south of the Transylvanian Pass. He wears a lambskin hat, a wool jacket, another jacket atop that one, and rubber boots. He carries a staff, a small day bag over his shoulder, and a silver pocket watch. Despite several missing teeth, he looks years younger than his age. Shepherding, it's like a virus, he tells me jovially. He's up here because he likes it, can't resist it, not because of need. After retirement from the forest department 9 years ago, he returned to what he'd done as a boy. It's late season now, he says. The sheep are giving less. We're milking them only twice a day. We'll stay till mid-September, he says. Then back down to the village below, a 2-day walk. I ask about bear troubles. Oh, yes, he says. Down in the village, a bear sometimes comes raiding with terrible force, breaks into corrals, takes pigs or chickens. And up here among the sheep? Occasionally here too, yes. But today, Ion Dinka isn't concerned. No bears or wolves nearby, he declares, with the confidence of a man who knows intimately his own little patch of mountainside. Which predator is more troublesome, I ask? Wolf or bear? Urs, he answers unequivocally. Wolves are smarter, sure. They lurk, they move like thieves, but bears bring more danger and damage. One bear, a blackish-red animal with white neck markings, took a sheep and 3 donkeys in a single night. Would it be better, I ask, if there were no bears at all? Well, better for him, yes, it would be. But the bear, it's Podwaba Paduri, he says, the treasure of the forest. Podwaba Paduri. If you lose this, you lose the treasure, he says. A forest without bears, it's empty. Not all shepherds see it that way, I tell him. He agrees, noting that most people who claim to like bears are gentlefolk. They live far away, he says, with no bear troubles of their own. Easy for them. Shepherds, plain men at work in the mountains, don't enjoy such distance. Their attitude tends to be, La naiba kuurshi, to hell with the bears. Here it is again, then, the muskrat conundrum. Eon Dinka doesn't call it by that label, of course, nor does he draw any parallels between the predator problems of Romanian shepherds and those of vulnerable, marginalized, rural people elsewhere. He doesn't even explain why, despite living the life of an unsheltered muskrat himself, he holds a more appreciative view of the creature that plays the role of the mink. He's simply a man of transcendent, generous spirit. As we sit talking, the neck bells on his leader sheep toll soothingly, klunka, 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 in the rhythm of their waddle across the slope. Life is hard, life is good, life is enriched by complications, and, he seems to feel, so it should be. A forest without bears is empty. Thank you.
And a person very widely beloved in Missoula, Lois Welch.
Thank you, Mark. I can't see you either. What he didn't say is that I also at one time directed the creative writing program and had Robert Wrigley as my student. Once upon a time, back in the 70s, when we were young and trout were biting every day and poets could become superstars, Bob Wrigley came from Illinois to UM, where he studied with Richard Hugo and Madeline DeFries and John Haynes. What an apt student he was. Whether he came with that distinctive voice or learned it from these fine poets, we'll never know. He was a great friend and a grand human being then, and has remained steadfastly so. Lest I rattle on about that level of things, I want to say facts are important in introductions. Bob received his MFA in 1976. He taught at Lewis Clark College in Lewiston, Idaho from 1977 to 99, with visiting stints at the University of Oregon and workshops everywhere. Since 1999, he's taught at the University of Idaho in Moscow, where he now directs their creative writing program. Twice he has taught at UM as the Richard Hugo visiting professor, the only poet to do so twice, and the only UM graduate to do it at all. He's published continually since graduation, 2 chapbooks and fine books of poetry, of which Lives of the Animals from the Penguin Poet series is the most recent. The others are listed in your program. He's almost alarmingly prolific, almost 300 poems in literary journals, a book every 2 or 3 years, and I have a sense we haven't seen anything yet. Not surprisingly, Bob has won award after award. That means honor and appreciation and readers, and sometimes even time and money. To name but a few of these, a Guggenheim in '96, a couple of NEAs, the Cutbank Richard Hugo Memorial Award from UM, a Theodore Roethke Award from the University of Washington. In 1999, he won the prestigious Kingsley Tufts Award awarded by the Claremont Graduate School. We used to call Bob the Idaho Poet Laureate, but he was actually appointed the Idaho Writer in Residence 3 years running, 1986, 87, and 88. Do you know who Governor Martz appointed Poet Laureate? Bob and his wife, the writer Kim Barnes, and their 2 children live on the heights of Moscow Mountain. Since they married in 1983, they've regularly been runners-up for the Cutest Couple Award, a secret contest in the literary West. Someone from California always wins, of course. These are some of the facts that you should know about Bob Wrigley. Sometimes these days, I think, we have too many facts pouring over us, too much noise. We should turn off CNN, ignore the hurricanes. Out in my yard last weekend, a black bear cub spent 2 days feasting on pears and apples and grapes. I haven't any sheep. Our dog, inside, was resentful and fascinated. I too was fascinated at the little guy lying against the apple tree, calmly gobbling apples that lay all around him, a veritable squalor of apples. I didn't call the bear police, nor did I write a poem, but I couldn't stop watching him. Bob would have written a poem. Bob Wrigley, in his new Lives of the Animals, takes on bears and owls and mice and dogs and, of course, cats. This is no field guide, no collection of campfire stories. Wrigley's poems ponder animals, including our animal selves, in startling detail. They tell us the news we really need beyond mere facts, about predation and survival, love and exaltation, and what he calls the fabulous order of all disorderly things. He shifts suddenly from the animal to the human view till boundaries disappear and we feel linked, indeed bound, to a rich and meaningful sensory world. It's such a discovery and consolation, one feels words themselves are renewed when reading his poems. Listen, please, to these poems as though you were saying them to yourself. Sing them to your soul, for your soul needs them. Keats said great poems are almost a remembrance. You will find it so with Bob Wrigley's poems. Please welcome the poet, Robert Wrigley. Thank you.
We need some of that cheese. I would have asked to read at this august gathering any time since it has existed. Wanted Lois Welch to introduce me because I knew she would do that, and now I have the terrible feeling it's going to be all downhill from here. But I have nothing but extraordinary gratitude to Lois as a friend, as an introducer, and as a teacher. I was telling her that I once, not too long ago, told an interviewer about a class I took from her, a Beckett seminar, that was probably the most rigorous and painfully enjoyable course I ever took as a student. And I have to say, I haven't read Beckett since, but I haven't forgot much of him either. I too want to thank Mark Scharouse and Kim Anderson. Those folks work awfully hard to do this, and it's a great thing And it's a great honor and privilege for me to read and be altogether unable to see anything but my own book with writers like David Quammen and Leif Enger. This book I came across some months ago, actually it's probably more than a year ago, a quote from the poet, the late Larry Levis, writing in an essay called Some Notes on the Gazer Within, about the presence of animals in poems. And Levis said, Levis is going to go down as one of our great poets, by the way. If you don't know Larry Levis's work, you really owe it to yourself to find out about it. He said, for him, when an animal appears in a poem, he takes it as a sign of, a symbol for the poet's essential muteness, that there is something in the poet that requires expression that only the animal can utter. And I guess I buy that absolutely. This is a book about animals, including the human animal, but it's also, I think, a book a bit about mortality, about being aware of mortality in a way that only human beings can be aware of it, and yet at the same time striving to find some way to deal with it as beautifully as those creatures we refer to as animals deal with it. So the book has an epigraph from D.H. Lawrence, and the epigraph reads as follows. And as the dog with its nostrils tracking out the fragments of the beast's limbs and the breath from their feet that they leave in the soft grass runs upon a path that is pathless to men, so does the soul follow the trail of the dead across great spaces. I'm going to have to use them. This is a poem called The Other World. So here is the old buck, who all winter long had traveled with the does and yearlings, with the fawns just past their spots, and who had hung back, walking where the others had walked, eating what they had left, and who had struck now and then a pose against the wind, against a limb snap, or the way the light came slinking among the trees. Here is the mangled ear and the twisted, hindering leg. Here, already bearing him away among the last drifts of snow and the nightly hard freezes, is a line of tiny ants making its way from the cave of the right eye over the steep occipital ridge, across the moonscape shed-horn medallion, and through the valley of the ear's cloven shadow to the ground, where among the staves of shed needles and red, earthy wine they carry him, bit by non-bit, into another world. I'm going to do as little prefacing as possible to these poems, by the way. Arguably, this is a poem about camping. It's called Discretion. Wearing only moon glow and the fire's final shawls of smoke, she made her way from the tent at 2 a.m., then squatted to pee. And the heavenly light showed me everything. Its cool tongues of silver lapping mountain stones and the never motionless leaves of aspens licking her back, her hips, haunches, and more, illuminating even the deep green eyes of whatever animal it was that watched her from the forest then. A deer, I believed and still believe, though I confess I did not rise that night to make sure, did not shine my light or murmur, but waited, letting my head as she returned settle slowly back down to the pillow made of my clothes, and welcomed her shivering back into the tent from which I had sworn I would not look. Do you love me? She's 12 and she's asking the dog, who does, but who speaks in tongues, whose feints and gyrations are themselves parts of speech. They're on the back porch, and I don't really mean to be taking this in, but once I've heard, I can't stop listening. Again and again she asks, and the good dog sits and wiggles, leaps and licks. Imagine never asking. Imagine why. So sure you wouldn't dare or couldn't care less. I wonder if the dog's guileless brown eyes can lie, if the perfect canine lack of abstractions might not be a bit like the picture books she read as a child, before her parents' lips shaped the daily miracle of speech and kisses, and the words were not lead and weighed only air and did not mean so meanly. Do you love me? She says and says, until the dog, sensing perhaps its own awful speechlessness, tries to bolt, but she holds it by the collar and will not let go, until having come closer, I hear the rest of it. I hear it all. She's got the dog's furry jowls in her hands. She's speaking precisely into its laid-back, quivering ears. Say it, she hisses. Say it to me. Good dog. What do you do with a dead horse? That's not the title of the poem. That's just a sort of rhetorical question. This poem means to kind of answer. The poem is called Horseflies. After the horse went down, the heat came up, and later that week the smell of its fester yawed. An open mouth of had-been air our local world was licked inside of, and I, the boy who'd volunteered at twilight, shunts of chawed cardboard wadded up my nostrils and a dampened bandana over my nose and mouth, I strode then into the ever-purpler sink of rankness and smut, a sloshful 5-gallon bucket of kerosene in my right hand, a smoking railroad fusee in my left. And it came over me like water then, into my head gaps and gum rinds, into the tear ducts and taste buds, and even into the last dark tendrils of my howling, agonized hair that through the windless half-light hoped to fly from my very head and would have, I have no doubt, had not the first splash of kerosene launched a seething skin of flies into the air and onto me, the cloud of them so dense and dark my mother in the distance saw smoke and believed, as she had feared I would, that I had set my own fool, staggering self aflame, and therefore she fainted, and did not see how the fire kicked the other billion flies airborne exactly in the shape of the horse itself, which rose for a brief quivering instant under me, and which for a pulse stump at least I rode, in a livery of iridescence, in a mail of exoskeletal facets, wielding a lance of swimming lace, just as night rode the light and the bones, and a sweet, cleansing smoke to ground. Bill Stafford said years ago, the hardest thing in the world to write about was a dead dog. Okay, Bill. This is a poem called Dog. Quotation marks around the title. For how many days had she shaken? She'd shaken and shaken, standing there hunched, unable to walk or lie, until exhaustion overtook her, and pivoting on one leg, she folded down, shaking, always shaking, and did not sleep, not even on the last night or the next morning, when he gathered her into his arms like a snack. She wheezed then, as though the weight of her so born were a kick to the ribs, and she drooled onto his sleeve, then lay in the grass where he placed her, looking up, her half-hairless tail a faint pulse of approval. And he raised the rifle, placed the bead in the notch of the sight, first on the slope of her slant forehead, and then among the mottled cowlicks of the coat across her chest. And she died, was gone like that, the bullet still chambered in its shell, his finger barely nestled to the smooth curl of the rifle's trigger of brass. For he was so intent on that awful chore, he might not have noticed her dead at all if the shaking, for how many days had it been, if the shaking had not come to seem the very motion taken in her by life itself. The shaking, a being that blood by blood thumps through his own brotherly bones as sap or rain moves through the billion suckling root mouths his digging has exposed, and to which he feeds her, saying over her grave the single word she had always known herself by, never understanding it was no name at all. Anybody here know what sweetbreads are? You eat them. There's a vaguely Shakespearean epigraph to this poem that actually comes from The Joy of Cooking. If you look up sweetbreads in The Joy of Cooking, the first line is, "What foods these morsels be." That's a great cookbook. This is a poem, I haven't shown this poem to my parents yet. They'll like it, they'll be just fine with it. Although it is true, my mother will complain that I've portrayed her inaccurately as being someone who, as I say in the poem, specialized in organ foods. No, she didn't. It was there. It was all the time, organ foods. Anyway, this is called Sweetbreads. Thymus of the neck and of the stomach, pancreas. It sounds like a pair of demigods in Greek, don't you think? Through lean times, my mother specialized in organ foods. The rubbery beef heart simmered several hours under pressure, no less rubbery, but having stewed by then a good dark pint of flavorful blood broth. Pork brains breaded and fried, but in any cooked guise, always and only gray. The various livers, calves on good days, steers on bad, kidneys, tongue, and even these soaked, blanch, and quick-fried odd delicacies once or twice. The butcher was sweet on her, you see. Therefore, in my mother's honor, I saute not just the tender liver of this small but fine bull elk, quarter-inch slices slathered in onions, but the sweetbreads too, pancreas, which means all meat anyway, and thymus, which means nothing but what it says. And in addition, in honor of my father, who hated every visceral tidbit she served him, but loved my mother beyond all sweet reason, I toss in the unlucky bull's fresh balls, dredged in flour, and brown them up golden, crisp and hot on the outside, warm and pink cut in two. They bobble on the platter among the slabs of liver and wrinkled sweet like four domes fallen in a ruin of flesh and fire. Sweetbreads my elders understood. All those dead deers who wouldn't waste a thing, who at the scent of cooking meat closed in and breathed it, who murmured as they chewed, who kissed the salts and oils from each other's lips, then went to bed those nights thankful and sated and blessed with a hunger that would lead in time to me. The two-poem warning here. Two more poems. I'm trying to end with the happier ones. This is not to say there aren't any dead critters in the last two poems. You can't get around them. Although this is a short poem called Kissing a Horse. Of the two spoiled barn-sour geldings we owned that year, it was red, skittish, and prone to explode even at 14 years, who'd let me hold to my face his own. The massive labyrinthine caverns of the nostrils, the broad plain up the head to the eyes. He'd let me stroke his coarse chin whiskers and take his soft, meaty underlip in my hands, press my man's carnivorous kiss to his grass-nipping upper half of one, just so that I could smell the long way his breath had come from the rain and the sun, the lungs and the heart, from a world that meant no harm. Affirmations. I am in favor of this pair of ruffed grouse, who in the midst of the snowstorm feasted long and obliviously on the wizened, bittersweet, long-fermented berries of the mountain ash. I am also in favor of the old dog who did not mean to frighten the deer, and while I regretted that I could no longer watch as snow accumulated along the doe's back, I am still in favor of the path it ran to get away, although its running is what frightened the grouse. And while it is too bad that in their wobbling, soaring glide, both grouse struck the window I stood in front of and were instantly killed, let there be no doubt that I am in favor of the tenderness of each bird's breast skin and the ease with which it tears and folds away with its feathers to expose the pink, warm meat of the breast. For I am in favor of this odd infinitive verb, to breast. As I breast one by one the supple front meats from each grouse, these limp-necked birds whose meat I am most deeply in favor of, quick-fried in butter with a skiff of salt and a rasher of coarsely ground pepper poured on, all of which, of course, I am in favor of as well. As I am in favor of the butter's hot, graceful glide across the skillet and the propane's dank waft up through copper pipe to the burner of the stove and the blue flame tipped with yellow that blossomed at the touch of my match. I am also in favor of the wine and of the grapes that bless us so many miles from their vines, just as I am in favor of how the sun going down now casts its light precisely through the gap beneath the far cloud's edge, the end of this very storm and the lip of the turning earth, and makes, as it does, an immediate billion icy rainbows in the air, an explosion so blinding that for a second I am staggered and take hold of the kitchen counter, just as the house lets go its stays and glides toward the night, as though it too believed, as I do, that in the end there would be another day just like this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. No one works more nor cares more for the Montana Festival of the Book than my colleague Kim Anderson, whom I've asked to introduce our next reader, Kim Anderson.
Wow, it is really blinding up here. I don't know how everyone's done it, and it's a warning to Leif. Leif Enger was born and raised in Minnesota, and although I spent a portion of this evening trying to convince him that Montana is a wonderful place to raise a family, he probably will stay there. He worked for nearly 20 years as a reporter and producer at Minnesota Public Radio, and then in the 90s, during the time he was doing that, he started co-writing a series of mystery novels with his brother Lynn under the pen name L.L. Enger. At some point, when he decided that wasn't going to be a money-making career, he decided to write a novel that he could read to his family at night. So I've heard him say in an interview. And the result is Peace Like a River, which was published in 2001 and quickly won major awards all over the country, was chosen as one of the top 5 fiction picks of 2001 by Time Magazine. BookSense picked it as their book of the year. It went on and on and on. When the book came out, I had just finished doing a book festival, and people started recommending the book to me, and I stupidly said I'd taken a hiatus on reading books with the word river in the title. It was my great loss for a period of months. When I did pick up the book, I experienced what virtually everyone I have talked to since experienced, a very deeply personal, satisfying feeling that can't be explained. When the paperback came out, I went to a reading here in town that Leif gave, and it was an experience I hadn't seen in many, many years, probably since I was in college. Everyone in the audience, and it was a packed house, had not only read the book, but they had evidently memorized the book. When there came time for questions, people would quote paragraphs from memory as a way of asking a question. It's touched everyone I know very personally. It's one of the most spiritually moving books I've read in a long time. It is my great, great honor to introduce Leif Enger.
Thanks, Kim. Wow. I don't remember entire paragraphs, but I remember the time I spent in Missoula last fall. It was a ball, and afterwards, Kim came through the signing line and asked if I might consider coming back for this Montana Book Festival. And am I ever glad that we came? Robin and my sons Ty and John are sitting down here. I think I'm pointing approximately at them. And we came out, and we've had a wonderful time this week. This is an amazing thing that you do, and Mark Scheraus and Kim and the rest of you who work on this and the volunteers are doing an amazing piece of work here. Keep it up. I'm really gratified. I'm really gratified to be able to come and even share a stage with these writers. And David, those bears and that cheese, and Bob, that grouse is going to stay with me for a long time. Years ago, Robin and the boys and I were camping out at Teddy Roosevelt Park. Has anybody been there? It's over in Medora, North Dakota. Really nice spot. And we were camped on the Little Missouri in the Cottonwood Campground. A beautiful place. And we would get up early in the morning and the sun would come up, and 200 buffalo would sort of walk through the camp every morning and take a little heat of us. And I was talking with a guy, we were talking with a guy and his wife, who, as it turned out, were also from Minnesota. And we were talking about where we like to go camping. And the guy, I'll never forget it, he said, well, every year I say, well, honey, why don't we go east this year? And every year we plan to go east, and we get down to the bottom of our driveway with the packed RV, and don't you know, we turn west. And what I have come to realize is that even though I have never lived in Montana, that I turned west a long time ago, a very long time ago. Probably from the time I was 6 or 7 years old and was going out goose hunting with my dad and my brothers every year to my dad's old home in North Dakota. For us, of course, North Dakota was the west. I didn't get as far as Glendive, Montana until I was about 8 years old, when we went out on the Empire Builder to visit my aunt and uncle and my cousin. Just a quick word about that trip. What I remember is that we packed a picnic basket at one point and went out to a park where there was a vein of burning lignite coal in the ground. It had been burning for years, and later on I was to go back to some of the writings of Teddy Roosevelt, and he talked about coming across these things on horseback, and so it connected me in interesting ways to the landscape of the West. And on the way back from that picnic, we stopped. My uncle pulled his car over. He was very excited. There was a big rattlesnake in the middle of the road. And he was just thrilled to see a rattlesnake and thrilled that he could show us Minnesotans what a rattlesnake was like. So he backed off and he jumped out of the car and he went hunting around for a big rock that he could throw at the snake. And he found a rock and he circled around looking for the right position to throw the rock from. And finally he heaved the rock as hard as he could and missed the snake and hit his car. And put a big dent in the fender of his car. And right after that, a big oil truck came along and drove over the snake. And my uncle didn't lose any of his good humor. He just leaned down and took a knife and cut off the rattle. And he gave it to me. It had 9 rattles. And I put it in my pocket and I carried it for years. And so to me, that is what Montana meant. It meant a place where anything could happen. Where you might see, wonders like a rattlesnake in the road or your uncle throwing a rock at his own car. So I guess Montana meant romance for me, and it still does. I'm just going to read a couple of short sections from the book that Kim talked about, Peace Like a River. I wish that I was alarmingly productive and had a new novel to read from. But what I am is alarmingly careful, and I just haven't finished it yet. So hopefully I'll get done pretty soon. Have something else to read next time I come to Missoula. Peace Like a River is narrated by a boy, an asthmatic boy of 11 years old named Reuben Land. His dad is Jeremiah. He figures in these scenes, and his big brother is Davy, who's 16 years old, and around whom much of the book's action swirls. And he has a little sister named Swede, who is 8 years old, Swede Land, and a writer of heroic verse. This is early in the book, and they've just gone out to North Dakota, wouldn't you know it, to hunt geese. Before dawn, we settled among decoys in one of August's barley fields. Dad and Swede lay on their elbows side by side, the two of them whispering under a swath. Davy and I took the opposite flank, he with his clawed-up Winchester goose gun. I was too young to shoot, of course, and so was Swede. We were there purely, as she said, for seasoning. In all the years since, I don't remember a colder morning afield. Rain can out-freeze snow. We lay between soaked ground and soaked swaths with a December-smelling wind coming over our backs. As the sky lightened, we heard geese chuckling on the refuge away to the east. The rag decoys puffed and fluttered. I yawned once, then again so hard my ears crackled. Davy said, "Don't go to sleep on me now, buddy." He could say it. He wasn't cold. Though his gloves were nothing but yellow cotton, he could handle an icy shotgun in evident comfort. I had on his outgrown leather mitts with 2 pair of wool liners, yet my fingers were clenched and bloodless. It seemed to get colder as the day came on. When Davy said softly, "Oh, Rube, I could live out here, couldn't you?" I was too frozen to tell him yes. Minutes later, I woke. Davy was poking me in the side. Finger to his lips, he nodded east. A lone snow goose was approaching, fighting the wind, making low, questioning honks at our flock of rags. I put my face against the ground, trying not to move. A goose is an easy bird to spook. The loner's honks got louder and more confident as it decided to land for breakfast. It was utterly fooled. I'd actually started feeling sorry for the doomed bird when Davy grabbed my shoulder and spun me so I lay on my back. He jammed the Winchester into my hands. "Take him, Rube." The goose was straight overhead, not 20 feet high. I flung off a mitten and tried to aim. The gun was way too big, but I balanced it out there and yanked the trigger. Nothing happened. Something was stuck. Then Davy's hand zipped out and clicked the safety off. The goose was just beyond us, but still so close I could hear its panting wings. I yanked again, shot wild, and the recoil slammed my shoulder into the mud. My ears rang high and clear, and the goose finally understood and tilted off to the left while I pumped another shell into the chamber and fired again. The goose still didn't fold, but caught the wind and sailed over the barley like a kite. Tears were in my eyes. I'd missed 2 easy shots and wasted Davy's present to me. Blind with despair, I fired again. The goose had to be out of range. Yet somehow it shuddered, went graceless, and made a controlled fall to the ground some 80 yards away. "You did it," Davy said. "Good shot. You took him the hard way, buddy. Better go finish him." But as I handed him the gun, almost sobbing with relief, Swede streaked past in her corduroy coat, yelling, "I'll get him! I'll get him!" And Davy said, "Oh, let her chase the old bird down." So I watched her go, yellow hair bouncing behind her stocking cap. Downfield, though, the goose seemed to have recovered its wits. It stood upright, taking stock. Its head so high and perky I feared it might take off and fly after all. When it saw Swede coming, it turned and sprinted away. I'm telling you, that goose could run. Seeing this, Swede lowered her head and went full steam, mud and chaff raining off her boot soles. Dad started laughing, whipping off his cap and whacking it on his leg, while the goose stretched out its neck and bolted across the barley. Reaching the end of the field, it encountered a barbed wire fence. It stopped and turned as Swede closed in. Did you ever see an angry goose up close? It's a different bird from those you've watched flying south or waddling in city parks. An adult goose in a wrathful mood can stand up and look a third grader right in the eye. And that's what this fellow did to Swede. She got within a yard and stopped cold. She'd seen Dad wring a few goosenecks and understood the technique, but those had been badly wounded, pathetic creatures. They'd seemed almost grateful to get it done with. This goose still owned its spirit. Later, Swede told me she felt numb standing there with her hand out. The goose had one blind, clouded eye, plenty eerie in itself, but Swede said the good eye was worse. She looked into that good eye and saw a decision being reached. "It decided to kill me," she said. From where we stood, though, all we saw was the goose raise its wings and poke its beak at Swede. She spun, slipped to one knee, and then was up and shutting the distance between us. The terrifying part for her must have been glancing back and seeing that goose coming after her just as hard as it could. Wings spread, its black beak pointed at her rump. Dad was laughing so hard he was bent clear over and finally had to sit down on a gunny sack, wiping his eyes. Swede led the bird straight toward us, and when she pounded past, Davy leaned over and snagged it just behind the head. A quick twist and he handed it to me, wings quivering. He grinned. "All yours, Natty." After Natty Bumpo, Mr. Fenimore's matchless hunter. It was a heavy goose. I realized I was warm, standing there with my mitts off, even hot. I held my goose with one hand and Davy's Winchester in the other, smelling gunpowder and warm bird, feeling something brand new and liking it quite a bit. Swede, though, was crying, her face in Dad's belly, even while he laughed helplessly on. I want to give you a little bit more about Swede. This is a girl who is young enough to insist upon romance and smart enough to realize that it's in large part true. In school, I swam upstream through geography and grammar, and Swede, who disliked long division, tried to win her teacher's favor by composing heroic verse. What was Miss Nelson supposed to think when Swede, dimpled and blonde, coming up on 9 years old, handed in a poem like "Sunny Sundown Delivers the Payroll"? Here's where I give Bob a run for his money. The men who worked the Red Tail mine were fed up with the boss. They swarmed around his office door like black flies round a hoss. "No wages these 3 months," one cried. "Let's hang the lousy rat. He'll starve our very children, boys, while he himself gets fat." And true enough, behind the door, a fat man shook and wept. The wobbling bags beneath his eyes said this man hadn't slept. A messenger had brought him word that made him feel his age. Valdez, last night, the 3rd straight month, had robbed the payroll stage. Swede had lost her heart to the West early on, something that gave Dad no end of delight. He supplied her with frayed Zane Grey paperbacks thrown out by the school library, Wilderness Trek and Robber's Roost, and of necessity Riders of the Purple Sage. Swede popped them down like raisinets. You have to admit she learned the language. And now the mob broke down the door, and now they found a rope, and now the boss was on his knees. A prayer was his last hope. "Oh God, I'm not an evil man, though everybody says it's all my fault that we ain't caught the devil called Valdez. Oh God, if you would ransom me from those who'd have me swing, please find the man and send him who can plug the bandit king." I have to tell you, I like this one quite a bit. There's nothing like good, strong meter to make a poem mind its manners. Show me free verse that nails a moment like this does. Then each man felt the air go still. Each felt a stab of dread. Each heard the sound of danger in a dancing Mustang's tread. They watched the horse come down the street. They watched the rider halt. They watched him size them man by man as if he knew each fault. His clothes and hat were black as ink, his dancing Mustang pale. His eyes were blue and hard enough to make the sun turn tail. He said, "You want to hang this man? I'll give you each the same. I don't much like a mob," said he, "and Sundown is my name." And it goes on. Sundown takes the payroll job, as you might expect, and gets bushwhacked by Valdez, who it turns out is smarter than anyone gave him credit for. And the ensuing chase leads into country where the sun is hot as madness and the ground crunches like cinders, there meeting many a snake and many a skull and many a parched ravine. I've kept a lot of Swede's old verse. This one carries a note on the back from Miss Nelson in her tranquil, feminine hand. "Excellent. Next time you meet your Mr. Sundown, tell him you know a schoolmarm who'd like to meet him." Well, I'm going to read one more section. Not to wreck the story for those of you who have not read it, but suffice it, I guess, to say that the Lands go through some terrible times now. The oldest son, Davy, commits a heinous act and flees the law and is on the lam. And meantime, the father, Jeremiah, has lost both his good health to pneumonia and his job. And so things are very tight, very thin and very cold in the Land household. And Reuben has just helped out by getting his first paying job. He has been paid $25 to take down a neighbor's old corn crib, which was leaning. That's just before Christmas as well. 2 whole days I dreamed with Swede about the things $25 could buy. The bills were straight voltage, juicing all sorts of hallucinations. Could you buy a Hiawatha bicycle for $25? Swede thought you could, and moreover, figured there was room for her on the handlebars. I was also tempted by the thought of water. I knew a kid, his name is gone, who'd gotten hold of a sweet-natured canoe framed up in cedar and covered with watertight canvas. The boat smelled like a humidor and floated so light the kid claimed to have followed to its source the nameless creek adjoining the bright river. He claimed to have paddled up through brushlands where burnt tamaracks poked from the surface of the creek, and the water slowed to rest, and the quiet was broken by the protruding fins of frantically spawning carp. All this magic from a wooden canoe that had been sitting disused in a barn. The kid, Alfred something, I believe, red-haired and double-jointed, had procured the boat in payment for a few days picking rock in the spring. I think a canoe, I told Swede. Telescope, she replied. She'd read some poem about a farmer who so loved the stars that he arsoned his place for the insurance money and bought a glass through which the Pleiades became a scatter of diamonds on a velvet cloth. Then again, it was almost Christmas. What about presents? Shamefully, the first person who came to mind was neither Dad nor Swede, but Bethany Orchard, whom I hadn't seen in weeks. What did Bethany want for Christmas? I'd have given half the money just to know. What are you thinking about? Swede demanded. Such a joyous, greedy talk we'd been having. She didn't want me adrift. Oh, I don't know. I faltered badly, though you couldn't have dragged the truth from me, Bethany Orchard. In fact, I had a sudden ache to say her name out loud. Reuben, are you worrying about Davy? Swede asked, and she looked so motherly and worried that I nodded and put on the gravest face I owned. To my enormous surprise and guilt, she got me in a bear hug and kept me there a while. Poor Swede. She always did think better of me than I had coming. The next day, December 23rd, Dad got out of bed. I woke from dreams of a gravel road along which I walked, shoeless, picking up nuggets of gold the size of baby turtles. We had in our bathroom a hot water tap that squeaked persistently when turned, and I heard it plainly as I stooped for nuggets. On and off it squeaked, and then I was awake, and though fiscally disappointed, knew Dad was up and shaving, and that the tapping I heard between squeaks was him knocking his razor against the sink to get the whiskers off. Bounding up, I rapped at the bathroom door and was admitted to the sight of Dad, standing at the mirror, soap on half his face and a grin showing where he had thumbed through lather. Morning, Reuben. His voice was quiet, tired, but free of the congestion that had so shortened his sentences of late. Are you well? I couldn't believe it. Just last night I'd heard him coughing. Reuben, you look starved. Go off and start some oatmeal, why don't you? So off I went, rejoicing, banging around the kitchen until Swede awoke and came in to issue instructions. Stirring the pot, she told me it was a big day and to get the maple syrup out of the back cupboard. I looked. The syrup was gone. Brown sugar then, she said, above the toaster. I shook my head. We used it up. White sugar. But that bowl, too, was nearly empty. And when I got out the 10-pound canister in which we kept reserves, the scoop inside rattled sorrowfully. Swede was disgusted. Well, get out some apples. We had a bag of old apples in the refrigerator, long ignored on account of their soft flesh and wrinkly complexions. But I peeled them down and chopped them small, and Swede found some Caro syrup and poured it in the oatmeal and told me to round up Dad. He had finished shaving and was in his bedroom. I knocked, and getting no response, went in. As I did, he stepped from the closet where he had been rummaging, and I glimpsed him upright, and as he truly was. A scream formed in my gut and emerged as a whimper. When shaving, he had worn a big T-shirt that fell below the waist of his pants, disguising his extricated frame just as the lather disguised his face. So obscured, he might have been a healthy man. If thin, now he came out of the closet bare-faced and bare-chested. His torso was not his, but someone else's, a drawn maroons from some sea story. His face, too, was bereft of all extras, so that suddenly I barely recognized him. How had this escaped me? Even his eyes had the transparency of incarceration, and he looked at me out of them with a mercy and pain that confused me beyond what small troubles I had ever thought to know. He nodded slightly, I suppose wondering what to say. You and Swede get that oatmeal ready? Yes, sir. I couldn't stop looking at him, at the way his khakis were belted across his hip bones. He said, I'm a little surprised myself, you know. In retrospect, it's hard to believe I didn't see instantly what to do with that money. But when it's the first you've earned by sweat, you see it as special and by golly not to be spent on less than the desire of your grasping heart. The more I thought about old Alfred and his cedar canoe, the more I saw myself paddling one just like it. Convinced similar exquisite vessels lay concealed in dairy barns all over the county, I told Swede of my decision. We're out of food, Reuben, she answered. Having used great gestures describing the canoe I planned to purchase and the adventures we would enjoy thereafter, it irritated me that she would change the subject. Well, let's go get some then. We can't. I really did need it spelled out for me. The truth is, I had been wondering when Swede would take the initiative and suggest we go up to the Red Owl for groceries. We often did the shopping, the two of us, pulling our painted wagon, Dad's money in my pocket. In the winter, we used a toboggan. If we spend any more money right now, she said, we shall be broke. Her emphasis on shall put me in mind, as it was certainly meant to, of Pastor Reach, whose inflections left you in no doubt of his good sense. I was smitten into silence, while Swede stacked dishes in the sink and ran water on them and waited for me to make myself gallant. But I was more interested in canoes than gallantry. I was annoyed that we were out of money and Christmas almost here. Also that Swede knew we were out of money before I did, and her younger than me. I was annoyed that I had worked hard to earn $25 and now would have to give my $25 to Otto Schock, the Red Owl man. There was a lot to be annoyed about. And I could afford to grouse because Dad had eaten his small breakfast and thanked us and gone back straight away to his bed of exhaustion. I stood festering in the kitchen. You don't want to canoe then? I like to believe we have all said things that approach this in stupidity. Swede didn't answer, but swabbed the dishes and rinsed them and laid them up to dry. Normally, I'd have taken a towel and wiped them myself, but it's difficult to do productive work and fume simultaneously. The labor dissipates your righteous steam, so I stood glaring at the back of her little blonde head, which was tilted in thoughtful mien. Sensing she was going to say something sagacious, I started to leave the kitchen, but was too late. In Little Women, she said, see? When Joe cut off her hair and sold it to pay for Marmy's train fare, you remember? Well, of course I remembered. After the shearing, Joe had gone home and stunned them all with her sacrificial present, the profit from her bounteous hair, her one beauty, as her sisters so backhandedly put it. If Marmy had begged Joe to go cut off her hair and sell it, Swede hypothesized, I wonder how heroic a thing it would have been. I didn't say anything, but I thought, crumb.
Thank you, Leif. A few more announcements. One is that, of course, all three of our authors this evening will be signing books in the lobby outside after we adjourn. So please do take a look at the books. One of the things we like to encourage in the book festival is the buying and selling of books, and we encourage you to partake. The Montana Festival of the Book echoes around the state in the spring due to the good offices of William Marcus and Montana Public Radio and Marvin Granger over in Billings. And I want to introduce to you the young woman, Lenny Holloman, who edits the recordings of what goes on at this festival. Lenny, could you come out? Lenny Holloman is the voice you hear introducing all the recordings that go on KUFM and other radio stations, and we're very appreciative of her work. And I have to tell you, I don't suppose anyone was able to go to all the sessions in these 2 days. There were 73. You'd have to split yourself in 8 different parts, which goes beyond what most of us can do. But you can purchase recordings when they become available later this winter. Talk to Lenny. She's with At Large Productions, and the CDs are not only played on the radio, but available for purchase as well. Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you.
We look forward to revisiting all of your And finally, I want to announce that next year's festival will be right here, same place, pretty much the same station, October 1st and 2nd, 2004. We look forward to seeing you all back for that, and more people, and more great authors, more great readings and panels and so forth. Thank you so much for coming this evening, and thank you so much for supporting the festival. We appreciate it. Good night.